Welcome to Nightborn Whispers, where the familiar turns unfamiliar, and the face you trust may not be what it seems. Tonight's story is The Shapeshifter's Game, a tale of paranoia, identity, and a predator that doesn't just mimic, it replaces. Lock your doors, double-check your reflections, and whatever you do, be certain of who you're talking to. The first body was found by the river, face down in the reeds. The second, in a locked house, slumped over a kitchen table, a half-eaten meal congealing on the plate. The third, in the middle of Main Street, under the flickering light of a lamppost. 3 bodies in 3 weeks, and none of them made sense. Detective Mark Holloway stood over the latest victim, Emma Carter, sprawled across her kitchen floor, her head twisted at an unnatural angle. The expression on her face was frozen in something between confusion and horror. Forced entry. No fingerprints besides hers. No struggle. But the worst part was the message on the wall, written in a trembling hand using her own blood. "Who did you see last?" Officer Daniels shifted uncomfortably beside him, rubbing at the back of his neck. "Same message again," he muttered. Mark nodded, studying the letters. "Whoever is doing this wants us to be afraid, to turn on each other. And it's working." Daniels exhaled sharply. "What the hell does it even mean?" Mark looked down at Emma Carter. The question had appeared at every crime scene, always written by the victim. It was not just a taunt, it was a warning. The coroner estimated that Emma had been dead for at least 12 hours. The problem was that multiple witnesses had seen her that morning. She had been at the grocery store, chatting with the cashier. She had waved to her neighbor. She had been alive. Except, she hadn't. A town on edge. Blackridge was a town where everyone knew each other, or at least they thought they did. Now, people double-checked faces in passing, locked their doors even during the day, and whispered in hushed voices about those who had been seen after they were already dead. The first victim, Todd Harris, had been found floating in the river at dawn. The night before, he had been at the bar, drinking with his friends, laughing. Nobody had questioned it until his body washed ashore, bloated and lifeless. The second, Marcy Lane, had been found in her own home. The problem was, she had been seen that morning picking up her mail. The postman swore he had spoken to her. The third, Daniel Pope, had walked into the police station at noon, asking about the murders. At 6 that evening, his body had been found on Main Street. The coroner later confirmed he had been dead for hours before he was ever seen at the station. Someone was mimicking them, pretending to be them. Mark had spent sleepless nights trying to find a pattern, something to make sense of the madness. The deeper he looked, the more unsettled he became. He found the answer in the town archives. The Hollow Man. The legend had been buried in folklore, passed down in murmurs and cautionary tales. The story of the Hollow Man. The old text described it as something ancient, a being that could take on the form of anyone it desired, mimicking them perfectly, down to their voice, their habits, their memories. It did not simply copy its victims. It became them. And once it did, the real person no longer mattered. They became disposable. The only way to tell if someone was real was to ask them a question only they would know. But even that was unreliable. The Hollow Man learned fast. It adapted. The legend had been dismissed as just that a story meant to scare children into staying close to home. But Mark was no longer sure where the story ended and reality began. The pattern emerges. Mark sat in his office, staring at the files spread across his desk. The victims were not random. Each one had spoken to someone new in the days before their deaths. A stranger. Someone unfamiliar. He cross-referenced witness statements, going through every name that had come up. Most of them led nowhere. But one name kept appearing. His own, Mark Holloway. His breath caught in his throat as he traced his finger over the reports. Every victim had allegedly spoken to him before they died, except he had never spoken to any of them. He grabbed his phone and dialed Daniels. His hands felt numb as he pressed the receiver to his ear. "Yeah?" Daniels answered. "I need you to check something for me," Mark said, keeping his voice steady. "The security cameras at the station. I need to know where I was last night." There was a pause. Daniels' voice was careful when he spoke again. "Mark, you were at my house last night." The blood in Mark's veins turned ice cold. "What?" "You came over," Daniel said, voice hesitant now. had a drink, talked about the case. You don't remember? Mark closed his eyes. He had not been at Daniel's house last night. Something else had been. Something that wore his face. The realization. The line went dead. Mark stood slowly, heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear anything else. The office around him felt suddenly foreign, the walls pressing in. He turned, scanning the room as if expecting to find something lurking in the shadows. Then, from the hallway, he heard footsteps. Slow, measured. He reached for his gun, his fingers tightening around the grip. As the footsteps drew closer, the door creaked open, and he came face to face with himself. His own face, his own tired eyes, his own slight frown. The thing in the doorway smiled. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Mark could not move, could not breathe. The other Mark tilted his head slightly, as if studying him. When he spoke, his voice was identical. "You look tired," the thing said. "You should get some rest." Mark raised his gun, finger tightening on the trigger. The thing took a step closer, and then, with terrifying ease, it smiled and whispered, "Who did you see last?" The final trick. They found Mark Holloway the next morning, slumped over his desk, his neck twisted at an impossible angle. The case would remain open, the murders unsolved. But the real horror was this. The new Mark Holloway walked into the station that morning, greeting his colleagues with the same familiar nod, the same weary smile. No one suspected a thing. No one ever did. And as he stepped into his office, his lips parted ever so slightly. The whisper was almost inaudible.
"Who did you see last?"
You've been listening to Nightborn Whispers. The Shapeshifter's game is a reminder that sometimes the greatest horror isn't what lurks in the shadows. It's what stands right beside you, smiling, speaking, living your life, as if you never existed at all. So tell me, who did you see last? Until next time, sleep lightly and trust no one.